That was a perfect lead into our next session, which is we're going to have a panel. And Dick, you can come right back on up here. We're going to have a panel on agency bridge preservation programs, and our panel members will be Sarah Sondag with Minnesota DOT, Tim Sherrill with Carolina. It was just throwing me because, I didn't want to get the state wrong. And Jason Druver in Michigan. I should be able to get that one right. But anyway, I'll pass it back to you, Dick.
Thanks so much, Dave. It's good that these folks followed me because I know I went through my slides pretty quick, but if you had a question for something that you might have seen or one of the steps, if you kind of know some of those steps, you can feel free to ask these folks how they're achieving that in their program. I'd like each one of them to take a minute to just introduce themselves of what they do for their agency. Before we get into some questions.
Good morning, everyone. Sarah Sondag with the Minnesota Department of Transportation, Construction and Operations Engineer.
Jason Druver with the Michigan Department of Transportation, Statewide Maintenance Engineer for Bridges.
Tim Sherrill, North Carolina DOT, Structures Management Unit, and I'm the Bridge Preservation and Repair Engineer.
All right, so now this is the interactive portion of the show here, so we're going to need you all to ask some questions. But I do have a couple questions started that we talked about a little bit ahead of time, so they kind of know it's not going to be hitting them cold. But these, hopefully we get the juices in your brines flowing and you'll be able to ask some questions. So first up, how do you identify projects and needs? What's your process? What do you use?
That's a good question, and summary of kind of how we have established our preservation programs. We really have two avenues. One of them is through interstate maintenance, and those projects are typically determined by pavement conditions, and the pavement folks are selecting those projects, and we do bridges within the project limits. And so that one isn't necessarily determination based on conditions of the bridges. It's really more of the pavement, so that one's a little bit different. Our other preservation program is what we call our high value bridge program, and those are bridges that have replacement values of 20 million or more. And so that's a great selling point to our legislators to give us money, because we don't want to replace a $20 million bridge very often. And so we want to preserve it. And so, we have a list that's a little over 200 bridges in our state. And so it's spread across the state. Probably half of them are on the eastern portion of our state, which is the Outer Banks and the beach out that way. Those are where our larger bridges, most of them are. And so, when we first started the program, I guess in about 2017, we were doing a little bit of a worst first kind of approach, trying to hit the worst ones. And so that's how we prioritize things. Since then, we're trying to spread the wealth across the state to make sure that we have some equity across the various divisions in our state. So nowadays at this time, it's really just trying to make sure when we're working through the 200 or so bridges that we're giving an equal share across the divisions as much as anything. So,
in Michigan, we have a 5-year call for projects we have to fill out every year. So you're filling out the 5th year every year for major replacement and rehabilitation projects. And then for bridge maintenance, it's more of a 3-year. So you have 3 years worth of that planned in advance. And as Dick was going through his presentation, I realized that nearly all 11 steps of this preservation process were part of our call for projects, not specifically named. Because you start out with your goal of, we want 95% of our bridges in good fare, and then you proceed from there on your selection process. And we always have a mix of fixes. Each region's given a certain pot of money, and they each have a bridge asset manager. Our Grand Rapids engineer is in the room right now. They select the projects, and when I was in that similar position, I would always start with, where are my road projects? Because I'm going to get free traffic control from the road program, and I would do everything I could possibly do to every bridge within a road project. And then I would look at, within our call for projects, we'd have, you're never going to hit your 95% goal of good fair bridges if you're only working on your pours, because your 5s and 6s are going to slip into pour while you're working on the pours. So you also have to have a plan for all of your fair bridges. You know, when are you going to work on those? How are you going to keep them fair and from slipping into pour? So we're also focused on the transition rate of good fair to pour, which is the graph that Dick Dunn showed. So, and then similar to North Carolina, we also have what's called our Big Bridge program. And that is actually, we have a 15-year call for projects on that, and that's run by our Big Bridge engineer. And so we have 15 years worth of projects planned, because most, even maintenance projects on those bridges are massive. In Michigan, it's any deck that's greater than 100,000 square feet is automatically in the Big Bridge program. And then all of our movables, and then any of our bridges that are extremely complex or unique or have their own maintenance manual because they're of such a complex design. So.
Okay, for Minnesota, I guess we have two different mechanisms depending on who's performing the work. So we do have 20 in-house bridge crews. So if it's a maintenance project that the crews can utilize or can perform, then we are tracking our needs within Bentley AssetWise in our maintenance module. And then the crews manage those workloads. So a lot of that includes the preventive maintenance, reactive maintenance. They do some smaller preservation projects, but most of our major preservation is performed by contract crews. And so for projects that are performed by contract, we utilize a system called BRIM. It's an in-house tool. It's a spreadsheet. Basically, it's bridge replacement and improvement management. It's a 3-step process that incorporates risk. So the first step is the resilience modulus, which utilizes engineering judgment to assign the probability and consequence of a service interruption. And it looks at a lot of different risk factors, including condition, traffic, scour susceptibility, fatigue, load carrying capacity, geometric, and also some materials and age and overlay data. And then it looks at all that information and assigns a bridge planning index, which is essentially a priority ranking tool. And then the second module is the improvement module, and we look at an action grid to determine the work type, time frame, and cost, predicted work type, time frame, and cost. Based on expected deterioration. And then the third module is an expert review module. So then those predictions are sent to the districts. And, because they have a lot of that internal knowledge and information on those bridges within their district. So then they have the opportunity to review those predictions and either confirm that or provide some additional recommendations or alternative recommendations for those projects. So one thing that we're in the process of doing, and I got to give a shout out to Paul Pilarski because he's been really involved in this, but is looking at improving our work action grid. And so we utilized information from different agencies like Michigan. You saw Michigan's matrix up here earlier that Dick Dunn showed. But we also looked at Pennsylvania, Washington, and Virginia, and looked at some of the factors that they were utilizing in their, basically their decision matrices or preservation decision matrices, and tried to identify some contributing factors. Some of the factors we're looking at are rebar age, deck NBI, the wearing surface element condition, crack density. We actually have an agency-defined element for defining linear feet of cracking, so we look at that density over the square foot area of the wearing surface, and then the underside of the deck. And the key question that we're looking at basically is what is it going to cost me per year of service life extension? So we identify various options, preservation options, and based on inputs that the user puts into the spreadsheet, then it will highlight those preservation options that best fit that criteria. But then takes it, and the user then can look at, make a decision based on that initial cost or that cost over the service life. And so it kind of incorporates cost into the equation and the decision matrix as well. So this is something new we're looking at utilizing. We're actually testing it against some of the scenarios and some of the projects that we've looked at in the past to kind of compare the decisions that we made previously and how that looks against this new matrix. We also have to look at some of our policies surrounding barrier upgrades and guardrail upgrades, and that factors into some of the costs that's within the spreadsheet. So that's one of the initiatives, and I think we also talked about the large bridge or signature bridges, and so I'll add to that. Minnesota did develop a high priority bridge list, and there are 26 bridges within our inventory that we have identified that are of more complex structure type, larger deck areas, higher cost to replace and maintain. And the idea is to preserve those bridges, to try to reduce the number of rehabilitation projects we have to perform on those bridges, so focusing on preservation. And we're setting aside $5 million per year to assign to those bridges in the high preservation priority list, or priority preservation list, excuse me.
In New Jersey, where I was, we had the same thing with the high priority bridge list. Same thing. We had a program of maintenance for those.
My question's pretty straightforward. I'm curious if your agencies work with your bridge inspectors to help identify projects based on what they see out in the field, because they're the ones who are obviously going to be seeing things right away. In Indiana, our bridge inspectors are required to meet at minimum quarterly with their bridge asset engineers. When they prepare their inspection reports, I require them to look up our program, our project programs, and to make sure the bridge inspection reports are updated with all work that's being planned. And I also require them to look at the scopes of work. So in case they see some other kind of deterioration, if we catch it early enough, oftentimes we can talk to the bridge asset engineer and say, hey, in addition to this work, have you considered this, this, and this? And it's part of a training process for our supervisors. We want them to not just be bridge inspectors, but to actually try to be bridge engineers and try to look at things through the eyes of possibly as a designer or maybe a rehab engineer. They don't have the decision making, that goes to the bridge asset engineer. So I'm curious what your agencies do as well.
Sure, thank you for the question. So for Minnesota, that's part of our expert review module, like I was explaining earlier. So the network level predictions go to the district, and within our inspection process too, our inspectors prepare the inspection report, and all of our inspection reports actually go through a program administrator within the district for approval, which is typically the district bridge engineer. And then during the expert review module, district bridge engineers, inspectors, bridge maintenance supervisors are all involved in those conversations on looking at the proposed list and scope of work, and identifying whether they concur, whether they would propose a different or alternative fix.
In Michigan, I would say we have two different ways to select projects at the region level. And the way that we're structured is our region bridge asset manager, like Mike Wilson in the room here today, he supervises all of the bridge inspectors for the region. So he selects all the projects for the region, and he supervises all the bridge inspectors. So that is about as close as of a relationship as you can get with your project selector and your bridge inspectors. Also, the unit I supervise is statewide, and we meet every spring with each and every region bridge engineer and their inspectors, and they develop a list of in-house projects they want to do with our in-house bridge maintenance forces, and typically that list is directly developed by the bridge inspectors. They have a list of, these are all the decks we want concrete patched this year, these are all the decks we want flooded this year, these are all the decks that we're seeing need to be, washed, have the downspouts jetted or whatever. So, and then that meeting also occurs with the region bridge engineer, the inspectors, my unit, and the region bridge crew. So we're all in the same room at the beginning of the season, and we select all the projects.
Yeah, I'm not sure that in terms of the project selection that we have as close of a relationship with the inspectors themselves. Our inspectors are pretty much separate from us. We do in-house and contract inspection as well. I mentioned we have the high value bridges, about a list of about 200 of them. About half of them are in the eastern quarter of the state, and so a lot of people in the western part of the state are like, we've got projects that need to be done, they're just not $20 million. And so we're working with we have 14 divisions across the state, so we work with the division bridge maintenance engineers to understand, especially in those other parts of the state, that, yeah, we don't have a $20 million bridge, or we've only got one, but they help us select other bridges within those divisions that are important to them. They're high value in a different way. And so that's really kind of how we're working with folks with boots on the ground kind of thing, with more local knowledge than what we might have centrally.
I just wanted to add one more thing. For our maintenance, so our inspection and our maintenance is within the same software, and the inspectors have the ability to add maintenance tasks also while they're performing an inspection. And then whether it's through a report, they can go through then a maintenance review. So the maintenance supervisor then would look at all those maintenance tasks and identify priority levels for each of those tasks. And so the idea is that we're tying both, and we do assign elements to all of our maintenance tasks, so it's associated with the inspection and the information within that inspection report.
One more thing here. I apologize. In terms of the preservation funding that we get centrally, the last several years we've been getting about $35 million a year. There's another $35 million that gets split between the 14 divisions. And those 14 divisions, the bridge maintenance engineers can do their own preservation actions that they want to do. They can either use their own folks and pull from that funding, or they can contract stuff out. Sometimes it may be different divisions handle it differently. They may do a comprehensive type project on 4 bridges a year, or they may do something like, we're going to go out there and just do joints. We're going to hit all of our joints, or we're only going to do epoxy overlays or things like that. But the local divisions have an avenue to do their own preservation actions as well.
Thanks. Great question, Tony.
Michael Basie, I'm with GPI currently. So I think it was Sarah that mentioned you have an expert review module or portion of that. How is that a paper review, or is that an on-site review of the structures that are in question?
It's a review. It's an Excel spreadsheet that gets sent out of our network level predictions for those bridges. And so they're reviewing basically work type predictions, time frame, and cost, and evaluating whether that makes sense for that structure, and as well as priority. We have that bridge planning index. So it's a spreadsheet that generates the information. It's sent to the district. There's fields within that spreadsheet where they can override the type of work and provide comments for that information, or override the time frame and provide that information back to central office.
Sarah Wilson with Illinois. I was wondering how much money is allocated towards bridge maintenance? I don't mean the bridge replacement or rehab, the big projects, but the actual maintenance funds in each state. Is it at all related to your needs, or is it just a set amount?
Ours has typically been a set amount. I think we're trying to move towards more of a needs assessment for maintenance for our in-house forces. There's the formula that predicts what amount goes to bridges and other assets.
It's been a while since I've been in a region asset management position, so I'm not sure what the exact numbers are, but we were given, every year for your call for projects, you got 40% of your dollar amount went to replacement, and then 40 went to rehab and 20 went to maintenance. And then annually, my unit has a $2 million budget, and that is to buy all of the equipment and supplies and materials for our bridge crews statewide to use. So they figured it would be easier if just one unit bought it and distributed across the state for just scale and pricing?
Our maintenance, bridge maintenance folks is typically a set amount. It's not necessarily, at least the amount we get isn't based on needs necessarily. I think the distribution of those funds between the 14 divisions there's a formula that breaks that funding down, but part of that is needs. I know that they typically have our BPR funds, which is the preservation funds that we split, and then there's the GMR, and the GMR is more of your, bridge washing and, fixing this spall or something like that. So, yeah, it's a set amount typically.
So how's it done in Illinois?
Pretty much a set amount. According to our TAMP, and I don't know the exact number, but they set a certain amount aside for pavement and bridge maintenance. So then the pavement and the bridges get to figure out who gets what share of the money. So it kind of gives me an option to get more. Certainly in certain years when there's big projects that need doing, but it's still just a set amount. It's not based on any demonstrated need or anything like that.
If I remember correctly, I think we're maybe around 10 to 15 million. And we actually have productivity measures in addition to performance measures. And so we look at, for inspection and maintenance, the cost per square foot to perform those types of activities.
And when I was a bridge asset manager in Michigan, I could violate those percentages based on the needs within our region. I could look at the needs within our region and say, well, for this year, 20% for maintenance doesn't make sense. I can use 30, and go the other way if I needed to for a bigger project. So,
or Dixon County. Easy question, I hope. States, you guys are states. You got bigger budgets. You're setting up projects of certain types in certain areas. Have you ever reached out, or is there any thoughts reaching out to your local agencies? Say, hey, we're doing deck repair, or joint repairs, or we're doing flood coating, and getting a bigger scale by inviting your locals in to the project. I know that you guys are all 5 years out, 15 years out. It's plenty of time to help out each other. There's other bridge owners in your states. Granted, I'm sure there'd be some contractual language so that this is yours and that's theirs, but everybody's in the same boat, and it seems like economy of scale, something might be worth looking at a little bit maybe. You guys ever had those thoughts?
I will say that that's a very good question, and in the past, I know that we typically have stayed separate from the municipalities. In our state, we own essentially all of the bridges in the state. And we manage them. There are the municipalities have bridges that they take care of, but it's a much smaller percentage of the total number. But again, in the past, we haven't really mixed the two. But I know recently there's been avenues for us to help the municipalities and work with those guys. But I get your point. It's not a bad idea if we can figure out that we're all working in this main one area right here. If we can get a bunch of them under one contract, better pricing.
Yeah, maybe you could also address, that's interesting, Tim. I mean, since you guys are responsible for your county bridges too, obviously they're in your mix. If you guys could talk about, they're not in your mix, how do the counties or the local bridge owners get funding for their needs? If you could just maybe address that, I think that would help Lance out with his question.
Yeah, in Michigan, local agency bridge selection is done by representatives from the local agencies. They submit the projects they want to submit to the state, and the state reviews them and refines their selection from there, is my understanding. My initial reaction to mixing a local agency project with a state project is I'm not sure the logistics and the funding and the management seems like it would be really complex. But with that being said, we are piloting, and I don't have all the details on it, we are piloting local agency bridge bundling program where we are going statewide and doing large amounts of local agency bridges packaged together that are of similar size and scale and scope for bridge replacements, because we have so many local agency bridges that are closed or very close to being closed in critical condition. So we're gonna go in. Let's say if you can identify 40 one-span local agency bridges that are all 50 feet, similar size, scope, beam sizes, and everything. Package that all together into one contract and let it for an economy of scale there. So we're piloting that. As far as I know, it was pretty successful so far. So that's one idea. You know, not necessarily mixing local agency with state, but mixing local agencies into massive projects to appeal to contractors.
I don't believe we have mixed contracted projects for state and local bridges either, due to some of the challenges Jason mentioned. However, on the maintenance side, a lot of our bridge crews have assisted local agencies with projects, with gland repairs or replacements, crack sealing, some of our preventive maintenance activities, especially if they don't have the equipment or the knowledge of the practices. We do provide guidance, and our Bridge Maintenance Academy training is open to our local agency crews as well, to provide some assistance with learning some of these preservation activities.
Yeah, and like Sarah said, my unit will go out statewide and they'll help anyone, local agencies, anyone. So we've done that several times. We'll go out, show them how to do a joint replacement. We'll mix our crews together with their crews to help them do a joint replacement or a flood coat. We even help the local agency with UHPC closure pours, you know, with our crews. So just about anything a local agency would want us to do, we could go out and help them. We always do.
Again, typically our maintenance guys are a little bit separate, but they do assist the local municipalities from time to time as necessary, because again, not necessarily, you know, a municipality may not have a lot of knowledge or experience in dealing with bridge issues, and so our folks do help out from time to time. I think if we were to do some kind of thing of doing a project with a municipality or for a municipality, I think it would be some kind of, we'd have to work up some kind of agreement up front that the municipality would reimburse us, but we would do all the contracting, the design, whatever else would come through us centrally.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that could work if we just put together an agreement, like a maintenance agreement that says the state's going to do the whole project, manage everything, design everything, contract everything, and then local agency just reimburses us. I think that would be feasible.
I think that probably makes sense too, just from the whole idea of the knowledge and the experience. You know, a lot of the local municipalities may not know how to go through it, and so it'd probably be easier and make more sense for us to do it.
Yeah, and I was just thinking the entire project has to be environmentally cleared, so our environmental specialists would clear the project and not have any mix there as well.
Could help too with construction inspection oversight on some of those projects. And I was just going to mention that I believe we have some agreements in place between our districts and our municipalities too, and we have performed some work, our bridge crews have performed some work for agencies through those agreements.
So just while we're talking about different ways of doing work, and there's a question earlier about funding, can you speak to whether you're using state funds or federal funds for your bridge preservation needs and how that gets divvied up and that sort of thing?
I mean, all of everything we submit in our call for projects, I think is either an 80-20 or a 90-10 split for the most part. And that includes all of our preservation. The funds my unit gets specifically for maintenance purchases, that is purely state funds, but our capital program that has preservation and maintenance projects in it is a mix of federal state. We also have some special allocations for emergency projects, or what we have in our state, our bridge inspectors call requests for action, and that's basically, I found something on the inspection, the bridge doesn't need to be closed today, but it might in the next 6 months if we don't work on it. So if it gets worse. So those are requests for action, and my design unit also does contracted repairs for those, and those are typically state funded only because of the turnaround time. We're usually getting those out the door and let to contractors within a few weeks. And I don't know about other states, but you know, we can't even get a federally funded project obligated funds in, less than 3-4 weeks anyway, so.
Again, our two avenues, the interstate maintenance program and the high value bridge program. Interstate maintenance is federally funded. It's an 80-20 split there. The high value bridge is totally state funded.
We're similar. I'm not as up on the funding side, but for a lot of our contracted projects, I think it's a mix of state and federal funds. For our maintenance, then it's state funding. We also have two different pots of money depending on if bridges are on the NHS or not, whether it's centrally managed or managed by the district.
Actually, this was, Jason, what you just said, something about possibly having to close a bridge within 6 months, or your projection on that. I mean, you're starting to fall into the range of critical findings on there. I mean, I'm hoping at that point in time, again, you're catching these things before you're saying your inspectors or whoever says, so we may have to close a bridge within 6 months. I mean, that's kind of, again, falling in the critical finding range.
For us, our critical findings are, we had to close a lane or a bridge today, and we notify the feds that we did it, and that's it. And I just threw 6 months out there as just throwing it out there. I mean, we have different ranges of requests for action, anywhere from, now, but that it's not a critical finding because we didn't have to close the bridge. And now meaning, well, in an ideal world, we'd be able to get a crew out there to take care of it within the next month or two. 18 months, anything that they feel needs to be repaired to keep the public safe before the next 2-year inspection cycle could be a request for action. So that's probably a better definition. Anything before the next routine inspection that should be addressed is a request for action.
No, I think one of the main challenges I've seen is in planning bridge preservation or some of these actions is you don't know the corridor plan or the vision. And so I'm wondering if any of you have gotten higher level visions for a corridor to help guide your bridge actions. Otherwise we're just maintaining and maintaining.
That's an interesting question. I don't know that I have gotten a lot of higher level type of ideas. We do try to communicate across the agency to get an idea. And this is, as we're developing our projects, we're looking at or talking to, the division folks, either our maintenance folks or maybe the bridge program managers within the division, planners, that kind of stuff, to see, is there a plan that, are you going to be reworking this interchange here? And if so, when? So that we can better plan the preservation work we might be doing on the bridge at that interchange. We don't want to go in and do some big comprehensive thing with the hydro and latex overlay if the bridge is going to be getting torn down in 5 years. And so we try to kind of communicate fairly well, and typically we do pretty good with that. But I'm not sure if that's answering your question, but that's kind of, from our standpoint, kind of how we try to handle those kinds of things.
I mean, in Michigan, the region bridge engineer sits in the region office, and we sit in a group that has the region pavement and program engineer for developing the road projects, and a couple of feet away from that is the region planner, and you can just talk to anyone and find out when you're doing your call for project selections, what the future plans are, massive plans that they're studying, so to get a better understanding of that.
The question came from Minnesota, so I agree it's a challenge.
No, I think at the extreme, I've had one bridge that we redecked and invested in, only to have the legislature say, hey, this is a corridor of commerce route, we're going to have to replace that bridge. And 2 years after we decked it. So I think that's a higher level thing that we'd like to see from the higher ups and district managers, just visions so that we can invest properly.
One of the other things too that we're starting to research are the decisions behind early replacement of bridges. And I think sometimes, you look at maybe corridor or functional, it's not meeting the functional needs, things like that, and trying to identify what are some of those factors that go into that decision of replacing a bridge early, and understanding the loss of service life, some of the cost impacts to replacing those bridges early, and trying to get some more information to help make better decisions.
I do have one last question I want to ask them. And I put this pinwheel diagram up. I asked Nancy to put that up there. Thanks, Nancy. So that might spur some questions for you. And the one question that I think we'll all struggle with, and I just want to ask your expert opinion on, is how do you evaluate the benefits of your bridge preservation program? Can you share any of that? Is there anything that you guys are doing, or you guys and gals are doing, that might be able to help our audience, as they struggle with that, to determine how are you showing the benefits of your program to the legislators to get more money, as Sarah Wilson so aptly described? So I don't know if you can talk to that at all, but I think that would be beneficial.
I guess in Michigan, it boils down, for me at least, to that transition rate graph that Dick shared, that we were able to slow how many bridges were falling from good fare into the poor category from 150 a year down to 20, 30 a year, just by implementing preservation. So I don't know if it needs to be any more fancy than that. As long as you can show a trend where you have a set goal of 95%, let's say, good fare, and you can show that you're approaching that goal, and then you're also showing that transition rate slowing, then I don't know if it needs to be anything fancy.
So this is the benefit of these meetings, these different peer exchanges. We've also now integrated a flow chart that looks at the change in condition like Michigan is using. So we're now integrating that into our annual report to look at the change in condition state within each, from good to fair, fair to poor, poor up, fair up, whatever that might be. And so thanks, Michigan. Thanks to everybody for sharing your practices. Another piece, we're looking at service life extension within our deck preservation matrix that I was talking about. So we're looking at how much service life do you gain, and what's the cost. So it's looking at that cost benefit. And then the third item is actually an initiative. So we've started a research project to quantify the benefits of maintenance. And we're looking at our construction history data, our maintenance history data, coupling that with inspection data and bridge design information. And we're looking at the impact, trying to quantify that impact, whether it's with decelerated deterioration or increased service life. So it's not just like preservation actions that improve condition. It's also looking at some of those routine maintenance activities. How much service life are we gaining by performing those preventive maintenance type work?
Yeah, I don't know that we have anything specifically related to the preservation program. We have a dashboard that is constantly showing updates to our bridge conditions, and we do have a big program going on where we're doing a lot of replacement of bridges, structurally deficient. Poor bridges. Sorry, we're replacing a lot of poor bridges with new, and so it's really, our dashboard is a combination of the effect of the new bridge replacements as well as the preservation.
Right at our time limit here for this. Let's give them a round of applause. This is some really good interaction, I think.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.